around Squaxin Island and Hardstein Island. It's a crucially important industry to the 35th Legislative District. I guess I would ask the question, instead of regulating the shellfish industry, are we doing enough to regulate environmental pollutants that adversely impact the shellfish industry? I know that the Native American industry is very supportive of environmental regulations to protect this industry, because if you look at how many times have the shellfish beds been closed due to pollution? Quite a few times. Do we know what's causing that? Not yet. We need to find out what's causing that to help the Native Americans and our shellfish industry, and also look at things like ocean acidification, which adversely impacts it from global warming.
Thank you. So the next question is, do you support a mandatory road usage charge, pay by the mile? Why or why not?
No, I do not. How are you going to figure out how many miles people drive? You're going to have somebody come around to your car and look at your odometer? I think it's going to be very difficult to come up with such a scheme. How can you enforce such a thing? And it's just not the right way to go. Short answer, no.
Well, we're in complete agreement on that, and that would be yet one more dagger to the heart of the rural economy, where people drive more on a regular basis. Again, going to Mason County, 55% of people commute outside the county every day for work, and that includes coming to the shipyard, working in state government in Olympia, and that type of program would just be a disaster for areas like the 35th. And how they do that, there's a pilot program going on right now. There's 3 methods. One, you do a voluntary odometer disclosure each year. Second one is having a GPS unit in your car, which that scares me. You talk about infringement of privacy. And then the third one is a hybrid of the two, and I forget how that one's formulated. But there's no way to ascertain too when you travel outside the state, et cetera. So I do not support that program.
Thank you. So moving on from mileage to carbon, do you support a carbon tax? Why or why not?
No, I haven't. The proposals that have come before the legislature, I did not support. I did not support the initiative. It's a poorly written initiative. It exempts some of the largest polluters that are out there, and yet taxes you immediately with an immediate increase in your gas tax, your utility tax, and that. And then the proposal we had before the legislature last year on the carbon tax, the money was actually being diverted into the general fund. It wasn't even going to promote other forms of clean energy. It was a complete shell game. So the thing that is before us right now is that initiative. I believe that initiative is very poorly written. We're all for the environment, but we need to take the right approach to it. And the way that initiative is written is not the right approach.
Thank you.
We live in a beautiful part of the country. Nobody wants to pollute it. We want to protect our children. Yet, without having some incentive for carbon pollution, we're not going to make any progress. I don't support the current carbon tax, the way it's written. I mentioned we live on Hardstein Island. People around the shoreline are pretty well off, but there's a lot of people in the middle of the island that are just barely making it. They live on something like $700 a month. They have to drive to town to pick up their groceries, and so they use gas. Any sort of an increase in gasoline prices for them is just going to be beyond what they can tolerate. And so we need to come up with some means of putting a value on carbon pollution, but yet not have it be a regressive tax where those who can least afford it are paying the most of their income.
Thank you. So the next question goes from carbon tax to pot tax. Should the share of pot taxes that are going to the cities and counties be increased to support school resource officers in all schools?
Interesting question. I know there's quite a hefty tax on pot or marijuana. As I understand, most of that money is going to support state-funded Medicare, Medicaid. And so if we cut in one area, how are you going to make up for that? I don't think that people, again, talking with folks and they're concerned about Medicare and Medicaid, they're not going to want to see any sort of cuts in their funding that would result if you diverted some of those funds from marijuana.
This kind of dovetails off the previous question on what you do for local government or district and local government. And this is one of these great unfunded mandates. The initiative was passed 4 years ago or 6 years ago on 6 years ago on marijuana, and the burden of enforcement lies squarely on local government, local units of government in one form or another. And yet the state retains the bulk of the money into its budget, and it's actually designated to go to education. And again, on a side note, anytime you see an initiative, whether it's lottery, marijuana, whatever the next thing will be, and they always say it's going to fund education, just keep in mind we spend $26 billion a year now in education. $600 million is a drop in the bucket. A lot of money to you and me, of course, but it's a drop in the bucket. So you're never going to have an initiative that's going to magically fund education. But yes, we need to ensure that those resources go back to the local communities where the enforcement is bared.
Thank you. And the next question goes back to transportation. What do you see as the priority in a fix for the SR16, SR3 congestion issues?
Yeah, those are, we have a couple of items going on there right now. The Belfair bypass is on track, that affects Highway 3. But really what we're talking about, I think, here is the Course interchange and beautiful downtown Course. It's a bottleneck every time of day, whenever you go through there. So this again, I'm working with the Navy on getting some national security designations done, because when we have the big earthquake, that whole area is going to be impassable, and that directly affects the national security of our two bases here at Kitsap. So do I have the magical answer right now here today and how we redesign that, how we divert traffic? No, I don't, but we are working hard on finding that solution, working with the community to come up with different alternatives. And I put that at the top of the order here on what we do transportation-wise going forward.
So I don't have a perfect fix either. I'm running to be a legislator, to listen to the experts' opinions on how to solve problems. I would like to ask Drew about the bypass question, though. You mentioned it, and maybe I'm mistaken, but I understood that you voted against the Belfair bypass. So I would like to understand that. I think the biggest issues that I hear from people in South Kitsap is congestion. And how do we fix it? We need to rely on the experts to give us those answers, instead of a legislator saying, I think this should be done, or I think that should be done. I rely on experts for matters like this.
So back when your challenge starts. No. You asked me.
Yeah, you want to respond to the question?
Yeah. So I voted against the transportation package because there was a massive increase in your gas tax, the late fees, and other licensing fees. And I'll tell you, every day, nearly every day, I get emails saying, what happened to my registration fee? I thought the gas tax was paying. Why is my gas tax so high? Because it was a poorly designed overall funding package. This is one of the weird things that happens in politics. Yeah, I advocated for the projects within our district. And the chair of the Transportation Committee knew I wasn't going to vote for the overall package. But this is where you're working across the aisle and working together, you can still come up with solutions. She recognized I wasn't voting for the package, and I still advocated that we have things within the 35th district included in that funding. And that is the beauty when you build relationships. You may not see eye to eye on every little thing that happens, but you see the overall picture and how to get it done. And so I was proud to support the Belfair bypass and get it into the package, even though I opposed the method of funding.
So I asked folks, well, why do you think Drew would say he voted against it. And they said, well, because it has to do with taxes, we shouldn't be spending tax money. They said, you know, the money was already there. It's not going to increase our gas taxes by putting in the Belfair bypass. I think we should try and leverage as much state money as we can to get it back into the 35th district. That's one of the differences, I think, between, again, being a little partisan, Democrats, Republicans. The Democrats want to leverage state money, which is really important for our smaller communities here.
Can I respond to that?
Yes, you do. You get a 1 minute response.
I think I have a pretty flawed understanding there of what happened. There wasn't money for the Belfair bypass. It was part of the transportation package that was passed and funded every project in the state. There wasn't some magic pot of money that was just sitting out there. It required the funding mechanism and the bonding of transportation, or a transportation bond, which was bonded against the gas tax dollars. And that is how all these projects came to be, that we're going to see over the course of the next 15 years. So again, I worked across the aisle to make sure that we had these projects in for the 35th district, but yet I did oppose the method in which we funded it. We're bonding and paying interest on a declining revenue source. Economics 101 says that's about the worst way you can fund something. So yes, absolutely, I oppose the funding mechanism that was used. We need to overhaul the way we do transportation, but I supported the projects that were in there.
Okay. So now, moving on to the next question, actually goes to David. The question is, if any, what new tax would you support, and what should that new funding accomplish?
So, again, I say, you know, a little difference between Democrats and Republicans is that I think the wealthy should pay their fair share. So I support a capital gains excise tax. My opponent here will say it's an income tax. You know, the state Supreme Court says an income tax is illegal. An income tax is something that you pay on wages. An excise tax is something that you pay when you sell something, like stocks. And so I would support a capital gains excise tax on the 1%. Or these are people that are making $670,000 a year. As long as those funds go to help fund education, because that will result in a decrease in property taxes if we have this stable income.
When I came to office in 2013, our state budget was $34 billion. Today it's $51 billion, and it wasn't because of tax increases. $17 billion in growth, 50% in 6 years, and not because of increases in taxes. The last thing we want to do, again, is put our foot on the throat of the economy in the state. You know, I do take issue with the terminology on the capital gains tax. It is an income tax. The IRS defines it as such. You can't, and as does every other state that levies it. And it's the proverbial slippery slope. Give Olympia the authority to do some tax, and over time, who it affects is continuously expanded. I do not support that. Again, we have grown our budget, our revenue by over 50% in the 6 years I've been there, and they've spent every last dime. It's time to bring that in.
Okay, and your last challenge card. Go ahead, David.
So Washington State has the most, or one of the most regressive tax structures in the US. How do we fix that? People do not want an income tax. And I think by having the wealthy pay their fair share, that will help to make for a more equitable tax structure. I lived through the 80s. I voted for Ronald Reagan. I was a Republican back then. And what did we see that happened with this supply-side economics, or trickle-down economics? We saw a huge increase in the national debt. We saw the increase, kind of the inflection point on income inequality, and I see the same thing happening again in the federal government, and it's creeping into Washington as well. So I want to make a more equitable tax structure.
Give a response.
Again, record revenue. I advocated in budget negotiations, let's use this money and lower our state sales tax. The answer from the majority party, no, we're not going to do that. God forbid we take money and give it back to the people where it belongs. That's the attitude down there. And you look at a capital gain structure, and some of the biggest impacts are farmers in the agriculture industry, generations that have farmed land and they sell off a portion of it and now are going to be subject to that. People have taken all the risk, now have to, and the state has shared in none of that risk. Somebody gets to share in the profit of it and break up small family businesses. I think that's wrong.
The most regressive tax structure in the United States here in Washington. How do we fix it?
Okay, so next question, David, is Olympia has mandated same-day voter registration and additional ballot boxes. How will Olympia fund their mandates without putting a burden on local governments?
So, how do we fund this? How is it funded right now? Is that going to increase the tax burden by just speeding it up? I'd have to look at the data. I'm an engineer, and so I need data and facts. And without looking at those facts and data or having it right at hand, I can't really answer that right now.
Thank you.
Well, it's been a huge cost to county government. That was a mandate that came out of Olympia a year ago, is that you had to have more ballot drop boxes, and there was no funding for it. And so now you talk to your county commissioners, they'll tell you it is a drain on their budget. That's pretty straightforward data, and especially in rural areas where you're having to go and because you have to send somebody there, they have to be there at the time the polls close because you got to lock that box. And that requires more manpower. And in rural areas, that has been a tremendous negative on county budgets. And the ironic thing in this is the gentleman that proposed this on the House floor said that there is an issue with access to stamps, and that's why we have to have these. Are you kidding me? Access to postage stamps was the issue, but we've yet put another unfunded mandate on local government, and I do not support that.
And next question is, how will you ensure Olympia and the Department of Corrections will start paying the full cost when state inmates are housed in local jail facilities?
Again, this is priorities of government, and the Department of Corrections budget has largely been underfunded over the years in everything from our staffing levels to addressing safety concerns, and we've seen the horrendous impact that has when an officer dies, a corrections officer dies, and that's happened recently over the last couple of years. And again, we put another unfunded mandate on local governments, so the state needs to be paying for what it is imposing on local units of government, and again, the Department of Corrections budget has been at tier 2 when it comes to priorities of government, and that needs to change because it impacts not only the safety of our workers that are in those facilities, the safety of those that are just trying to do their time, but it also impacts the budget of our local communities in a negative way. So we need to fix that.
I agree. And I also want to bring up the topic of the cost of incarcerating these people, who most of them have mental health issues, or I guess I shouldn't say most of them because again I don't have the data, but a lot of them have mental health issues. And so should we be locking up folks that really need mental health care in prisons, which are very expensive? In Shelton area, we're opening up a new mental health facility, an emergency crisis center, and I think that's a much better solution than putting people who need help into prison.
Thank you. So the next question is, are you, quote, for the people, end quote, or, quote, for the party, end quote? Explain your response.
Interesting. So on our office downtown, I made the sign outside which says, "Putting people first." And that's what I stick with. Party-wise, you know, I told you I was a Republican at one time, and I became an independent, and then switched to the Democratic Party. Not because of the party message, but because I was, well, I take that back. I did change because of the party message. I saw the GOP party being adversely influenced by the Tea Party. I just couldn't stand by anymore seeing what it had become. And so I changed to the Democratic Party because of their message and because I was for people and not for profits, corporations, big corporations, and party message.
I've always done my best to put the interests of the 35th District first. Does that mean all of us agree on every issue? Absolutely not. You got 135,000 people that you represent. We've never had any item on the ballot in which it's been 135,000 to 0. Never. But I work hard to understand where people are at, how they view things, and to make the best decision possible. I have one of the strongest bipartisan track records in Olympia. You know, the nature of campaigns and politics is you get criticized for the handful of items that are partisan, but everything that was a bipartisan effort is always tremendously overlooked. And I'll take one example in that, and this was in my first term in 2013. I became a strong advocate for a program called Fight Crime, Invest in Kids. And I stood against my caucus on this issue. It was because of a budget, it was a $300 million budget item. But I took a stance and actually persuaded half of my caucus on an issue that we didn't really own, but we needed to. And I will continue to work in those matters in Olympia.
Thank you. Well, that concludes our questions from the audience members. We have now go down to the 2-minute summary, and David, you started us, so Drew, I'd like for you to begin the 2-minute summary.
Okay. Well, thank you for being here this morning, and I appreciate the opportunity to be before you and hear your questions. And thank you, David, for running. I think it's always good for our democracy when we have the discussions and the debates, and I think it makes our community stronger. Again, I look at my track record over the last 6 years, and working across the aisle, working for the people, and doing what I feel is in the best interest of this district and the state. I'm going to continue to do that. We have unique opportunities and challenges in this state and this district. We need to harness those opportunities and grow and continue to be strong and recognize our challenges and make those into opportunities. I will continue to be a strong advocate for world-class K-12 education, for having a strong economy, and for keeping state government accountable to you, the taxpayer. Those are my top 3 priorities. They always have been, they always will continue to be. And I'm proud of the legislation I've had signed into law in all 3 of those areas. And this past year's key legislation that was put into law that came from constituents regarding domestic violence. The Victims' Right Bill for people that had a questionable immigration status. That was, again, something that was not in line with many people in my caucus, but we got that passed into law. And I'm going to continue to work in those regards and work for you, the people, and ensure that we have the best opportunities for everyone that we can in this district, and at the same time that we protect the vulnerable and those that truly cannot help themselves, ensure that our moral obligations are upheld to protect them. I look forward to returning to Olympia. I ask for your vote, and I thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Yes, and I'd like to thank Drew also for his 6 years of service. You know, we both want the best for the district here. We just have different approaches to advancing the district. So, as I went around and talked with folks, I asked them what their most pressing needs were. And they said, well, the number one thing I heard was property taxes. Property taxes are killing us. And so I'd like to go on record to say I want to reduce property taxes now, in the future. Drew, I think you could have voted to reduce taxes next year. I don't want to hurt our kids by taking tax money away from schools. I want to enable the wealthy 1% or those making $670,000 a year to help educate our kids. The other thing I heard was healthcare is really important for us. We have a lot of senior citizens in the region, and so I want to do whatever I can to help protect our healthcare, Medicare, and Medicaid. The other thing I heard was jobs. Yeah, all the politicians talking about jobs. I'm going to bring jobs back to the county. I want to bring better paying jobs back to the county, not just service jobs, not just mushrooms and marijuana. I'm a high-tech guy. I worked at Boeing for many years, kind of their idea guy as to how to develop new technologies and new business offshoots of the company that we could develop. And so I would apply that technology and also my experience to indeed bring back some jobs here to the district. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Well, that concludes our action issues for this morning, ladies and gentlemen.